Nobody in the Galactic ruling Senate had ever lost sleep over Earth. It sat in the unfashionable arm of a middle-aged galaxy, orbiting an ordinary yellow star. Its dominant species could not read minds, bend light, or share a single collective thought. By every metric the Senate used to measure civilizations, humanity was nothing. The official classification came down as Grade F, the lowest tier, a polite way of saying irrelevant. Pavlov received his assignment on a slow Tuesday aboard the Senate Observatory Station above Alar Prime. He was young by Ilhari standards, barely 200 cycles old, and he had made the mistake of questioning a senior analyst's data during a budget review. That earned him a punishment dressed up as a promotion. Earth observation post, his supervisor said without looking up. Congratulations. Pavlov stared at the transfer order. Earth, a planet so unimportant that the last observer had filed exactly 4 reports in 11 years, and 3 of them were complaints about the food. He arrived in orbit 6 days later aboard a small cloaked shuttle. The planet below was blue and white and green, swirling with weather systems that moved with no pattern he could predict. His equipment activated, and he began scanning. The first thing he noticed was the noise. Not electromagnetic noise, though there was plenty of that. Every frequency was jammed with signals. Music, arguments, news broadcasts, entertainment, emergency calls, all of it layered on top of itself in a wall of overlapping sound. No species in the Senate transmitted this carelessly. Communications were orderly, structured, filtered through hive mind consensus or psychic relay channels. Humans just shouted into the void and hoped someone was listening. Pavlov spent his first week simply trying to sort the data. He watched humans through observation drones no larger than insects. He studied their cities, their governments, their daily lives. And he found himself confused. They argued constantly. Not the formal debates of the Draven Collective, where disagreements were resolved through psychic consensus in minutes. Human arguments were loud and messy, and sometimes lasted for years. They fought over resources, over ideas, over things so small that Pavlov could not understand why anyone cared. A boundary line on a map, the name of a holiday, whether a particular food should be served hot or cold. And yet somehow, impossibly, they kept functioning that he watched a coastal city recover from a massive storm. Within hours, humans who have been arguing about politics today before were pulling strangers out of flooded buildings. He watched 2 nations that had spent decades threatening each other sit down at a table and draft a trade agreement over the course of a single weekend. He watched a group of teenagers in a small town raise money to build a well for a village on the other side of the planet, a place none of them had ever visited or would likely ever see. None of it made sense by Senate standards. These creatures had no psychic bond, no hive structure, no shared consciousness. Every single one of them was alone inside their own skull. They could not feel what others felt. They could not share thoughts or merge awareness. Why did they keep helping each other? Pavlov ran the data through every behavioral model the Senate had developed over 9,000 years. None of them fit. Human cooperation did not follow logical self-interest patterns. It did not match hive mind efficiency models. It did not align with dominance hierarchy predictions. Humans helped others when it cost them something. Sometimes when it cost them everything. He wrote his report carefully. He spent 3 days choosing his words, knowing that no one would read them, but wanting to be precise anyway. Species 742 F demonstrates a behavioral pattern not currently accounted for in Senate classification frameworks. Despite lacking all recognized forms of collective intelligence, they display consistent cooperative behavior driven by an internal motivation I can only describe as voluntary empathy. They choose to care. This is not efficient. It is not logical, but it is persistent, and I believe it warrants further study. He submitted the report. The Senate's automated system flagged it as low priority. A junior clerk glanced at the summary, noted it concerned a Grade F world, and filed it in the archive where reports went to be forgotten. 3 senior analysts received a copy as part of a routine distribution. Not one of them opened it. Pavlov waited for a response that never came. He sat in his small shuttle above the blue planet and watched humans do what they always did. They fought. They failed. They picked themselves up. They helped the stranger next to them. And they kept going. He did not know it yet, but his report would matter someday. Not because the Senate would finally read it, but because everything he had observed, every small act of stubborn kindness, was building towards something the galaxy had never seen before. Down on the surface, humanity went about its day. They had no idea they had been classified, judged, and dismissed. They had no idea that anyone was watching, and they had no idea what was coming. The chamber of the Galactic Ruling Senate was shaped like the inside of an eye. Rows of seats curved upward in every direction, and at the center stood a single platform where speakers addressed the assembly. Light poured in from a crystalline ceiling that shifted color based on the mood of the majority. Today it glowed a calm, satisfied blue. The elder species were pleased with themselves. Riva Okafor had never seen anything like it. She had spent 22 years as a diplomat on Earth, negotiating water rights, border disputes, and trade deals between nations that had been arguing for centuries. She thought she understood politics. But standing on this platform, looking up at thousands of alien faces arranged in a perfect arc above her, she realized that Earth's politics were a playground fight compared to this. The Galactic Accord of Restricted Advancement had been passed 6 hours before she arrived. Nobody had told her it was even being discussed. The Accord was elegant in its cruelty. It restricted access to jump gate technology, advanced medical databases, and interstellar trade routes for any species classified below Grade C. The language was neutral and bureaucratic. It spoke of development thresholds and technological readiness assessments and graduated integration timelines. But Riva had read enough treaties to recognize what it really was: not a lock on the door. Over 40 species were affected. Small civilizations on the edges of known space, cultures that had barely made it past their own star systems. But the real target was obvious. Earth had been catching up too fast. Human engineers had pulled apart a crashed Sorith shuttle found in the Arctic 7 years ago and figured out the basics of gravity manipulation within 18 months. Human scientists had decoded fragments of an Ilhari medical database leaked by a sympathetic trader and started developing treatments that the Senate had kept restricted for thousands of years. Humanity was not supposed to do that. Grade F species were supposed to stay quiet and grateful and small. Riva stood on the platform and looked at the faces above her. The Draven delegates sat in perfect stillness, their 4 eyes unblinking, their minds linked in a seamless psychic web. The Ilhari delegation shimmered with light patterns that rippled across their translucent skin, communicating in colors humans could barely see. The Sorith representatives towered in their seats, their massive frames carved for what looked like living stone. She was the smallest person in the room, the only one who stood alone. I am here to request that Earth be granted fair access to interstellar trade routes and medical technology, she said. Her voice carried through the translation systems and filled the chamber. Silence. Then a ripple of color from the Ilhari section. Amusement. The Draven's senior delegate rose. His name was Thal Avarek, and he had held his seat for over 1,000 years. He looked at Riva the way someone might look at an insect that had crawled onto a dining table. The Accord exists to protect developing species from technology they are not prepared to handle, he said. His tone was patient and condescending. Earth has been a spacefaring culture for less than a century. You have no psychic infrastructure, no collective processing ability, and no energy manipulation capacity. You're a biological noise. Granting you access would be irresponsible. Laughter. Not for everyone, but from enough. The chamber's ceiling flickered pink. Riva let it settle. She had been laughed at before. She had sat across from warlords and dictators and men who thought she was too young or too small or too female to be in the room. She had learned that the best response to mockery was patience. I understand the Senate's position, she said. I have reviewed the Accord. I have read every provision and every exception clause. And I want this chamber to know that Earth formally objects to its passage on the grounds that it violates the Senate's own founding charter, which guarantees all recognized species the right to pursue advancement without external restriction. More silence. This time, there was no laughter. Thal Avarek's 4 eyes narrowed. "Your objection is noted," he said, "and overruled." Riva nodded slowly. She looked around the chamber one more time. She memorized the faces, the lights, the shape of the room. She wanted to remember every detail. "You will remember this day," she said. Then she stepped off the platform, walked through the corridor, boarded her shuttle, and left. Back on Earth, she delivered her report to a closed session of the United Nations Security Council. She played the recording of the Senate session. She showed them the full text of the accord. She explained in clear and simple terms what it meant. Earth was locked out. No trade, no medicine, no technology, no future among the stars. The room was silent for a long time. Then the arguments began. Some wanted to protest through official channels. Some wanted to build weapons. Some wanted to surrender and accept the classification. Riva waited until they finished. Then she said the only thing that mattered. "They think we are nothing. They wrote laws to keep us that way. So we have 2 choices. We accept their laws, or we make our own." Within 6 months, every major nation on Earth signed the Pact of Common Purpose. It was the first time in human history that every government agreed on a single directive: break the laws. All of them, quietly, and help everyone they locked out along the way. Somewhere in the outer rings of Sorth-controlled space, on a moon so small it did not have an official name, a human woman named Adiz Nwosu was teaching an alien child how to breathe. The child was Bravari, a small species with fragile lungs and thin, almost transparent skin that glowed faintly in the dark. The Bravari homeworld had been stripped of its atmosphere stabilizers 2 centuries ago when the Senate reclassified their planet as a mining zone. Since then, every generation breathed a little harder than the last. Their lungs were failing. The Senate's medical database had a treatment. It was restricted under the accord. Adiz did not have the Senate's treatment. What she had was a portable oxygen concentrator she had built from salvaged shuttle parts, a set of breathing exercises adapted from high-altitude training programs on Earth, and the kind of patience that only comes from watching someone struggle and refusing to look away. The child's name was Pell. He was 4 years old by Bravari counting, and his lungs rattled with every breath like paper being crumpled inside his chest. He sat on a metal crate in the back room of an unlicensed medical clinic and looked up at Adiz with wide silver eyes. "Again," she said gently. "Slow breath in. Count to 4. Slow breath out." Pell tried. His chest shuddered. A thin whistling sound escaped his throat. But the breath came, and it stayed, and when he exhaled, it was steadier than before. Adiz smiled. "Good. You're getting stronger." She was one of 300 human volunteers operating across the outer systems. The network had no official name at first. It started as scattered acts of defiance. Engineers who smuggled blueprints, doctors who shared formulas, teachers who set up data relays on forgotten moons. But within a year, it became something bigger. Someone started calling it the Open Road, and the name stuck. The Open Road did not fight. It built that on a barren rock called Duvin's Reach, human engineers assembled an unlicensed jump gate from parts scavenged out of 3 different junkyards. It was ugly. It sparked when it powered on and made a sound like grinding metal. But it worked. For the first time, a minor species could travel between systems without paying the Senate's gate fees or requesting permission that would never be granted. That on a station above the Theni homeworld, human teachers set up a knowledge exchange. They uploaded everything: mathematics, medicine, agriculture, music, literature, engineering. All of it free. All of it illegal under the Accord's technology restriction clauses. A Theni elder watched the data streams pour into their archives and asked the human coordinator why they were doing this. The coordinator, a retired schoolteacher from a small town in Brazil named Gustavo Reis, shrugged and said, "Because someone should." Back in his shuttle above Earth, Paulev watched all of it happen. His observation equipment picked up the transmissions. His scanners tracked the movement of human ships into restricted sectors. He logged every unlicensed gate activation, every medical supply drop, every data transfer. His duty was clear. He was a Senate observer. He was supposed to report. He opened the report form. He stared at it. He thought about Pell, the Bravari child whose breathing exercises he had monitored through a surveillance drone. He thought about the Thinny Elder's face when the knowledge archive opened. He thought about the sound the jump gate made when it fired, that ugly grinding roar that meant freedom for an entire species. He closed the form. He told himself it was because the data was incomplete. He told himself he needed more time to verify the scope of the violations before filing an official report. He told himself a lot of things, and none of them were the real reason. The real reason was simpler. He could not bring himself to stop them. Months passed. The open road grew. 40 species became members. Then 50. Human ships moved through the outer systems like ghosts, appearing at settlements and outposts where nobody expected them, delivering things that should not exist in the hands of grade F civilizations. The Senate noticed nothing at first. The elder species were busy with their own affairs. The Draven Collective was managing a psychic resonance crisis in their inner territories. The Sorath Federation was restructuring its mining operations. The Ilhari Dominion was focused on a trade dispute with a grade B civilization over mineral rights. But eventually, the numbers stopped adding up. Ilhari trade profits dipped for the first time in 4 centuries. Cargo routes that had been reliably profitable for generations were losing traffic. Goods that the Dominion sold at premium prices were appearing on black markets at a fraction of the cost. Someone was undercutting them. Someone was building infrastructure outside Senate control. The Ilhari Intelligence Bureau began investigating. It took them 2 months to trace the disruptions back to their source. When a report landed on the desk of the Dominion's ruling council, the reaction was immediate. A fleet was dispatched. 12 warships, fully armed, carrying enough firepower to level a small moon. Their destination was a tiny settlement on the edge of Bravari space where humans had been running a medical clinic for 9 months. Brevin's Drift. Adiz heard the alert from her clinic. She looked at Pell, who was sleeping on a cot in the corner, breathing slowly and steadily for the first time in his life. She looked at her staff, at the shelves of medicine they had built from nothing, at the walls covered in drawings that Bravari children had made for them. Then she picked up her communicator and called Danny Aguilar. Danny Aguilar had been a freight hauler for 14 years before anyone asked him to do something that mattered. He had spent most of that time running cargo between orbital stations, carrying fertilizer and machine parts and frozen food across the same routes until he could fly them with his eyes closed. It was honest work. It was boring work. And then Riva Okafor's people had come knocking, and everything changed. When Adi's call came through, Danny was 3 systems away, loading water purification units onto his ship. He listened. He asked one question. How long until the fleet arrives? 14 hours, Adiz said. Danny did the math. He could reach Brevin's Drift in 11 if he pushed the engines past their safe limits. He sent a message on the open road frequency. Short. Simple. Brevin's Drift. 14 hours. They're coming for the clinic. Then he flew. He arrived with 10 other human freighters. Cargo haulers, every one of them. No weapons. No shields worth mentioning. Ships built for carrying grain and construction materials and medical supplies across the empty stretches between stars. They formed a line between the moon and the direction the Ilhari fleet would come from. And they stopped. Danny sat in his cockpit and looked at the other ships on his screen. 11 vessels crewed by people who had volunteered to park themselves in front of a dozen warships with nothing but hull plating between them and oblivion. That he opened a channel. Everyone clear on the plan? There is no plan, said a voice from one of the other ships. A woman named Suki Tanaka, who had been hauling freight even longer than Danny. We just sit here. That is the plan, Danny said. They waited. The Ilhari fleet dropped out of jump space 9 hours later. 12 warships arranged in a diamond formation, their hulls glowing with the deep violet energy signatures that meant their weapons were already powered. The fleet commander was an Ilhari officer named Rosh Valine. He had been given simple orders. Destroy the clinic. Remove the humans. Send a message. He did not expect to find 11 cargo ships blocking his path. Rosh opened a communication channel. Unidentified vessels. You are in a restricted enforcement zone. Move aside immediately, or you will be classified as hostile elements and dealt with accordingly. Danny leaned forward and pressed the broadcast button. But he did not transmit on the military channel. He transmitted on every open road frequency in the sector, every relay station, every listening post, every settlement that had ever received help from a human volunteer. This is Danny Aguilar of the freighter Honest Work, broadcasting for Brevins Drift. There's a medical clinic on this moon. It treats Brevari children with lung disease. The Ilhari Dominion has sent 12 warships to destroy it. We are 11 unarmed cargo ships. We are not moving. Let the galaxy watch what happens next. The transmission went out at the speed of light and then faster, bouncing through jump relays that the open road had been quietly installing for months. Within minutes, it reached dozens of systems. Within an hour, it had spread across the outer territories. Rosh Valine stared at his communication officer. What is he doing? Broadcasting, Commander. On open channels. It is being picked up across the sector. Rosh considered his options. His orders were clear. The clinic was illegal. The humans were in violation of the Accord. He had every legal right to remove them by force. But the galaxy was watching. The first ship arrived 4 hours later. A Brevari transport, barely functional, its hull scarred from years of neglect. It parked beside Danny's freighter and went silent. Then a Theni science vessel. Then 2 cargo ships from a species Danny had never even met, small gray beings who communicated through vibrations in the floor. They kept coming. Ships from species that the Senate had classified as irrelevant. Species that had been locked out, held down, told they were not ready, not worthy, not enough. They came in vessels that leaked atmosphere and groaned when they changed direction. They came because someone had helped them once, and now it was their turn to be by the time the trickle stopped. Over 30 species had sent ships. None of them were armed. All of them were present. Rosh Valine looked at the field of vessels between his fleet and the moon. Firing now would not just destroy Clinic. It would mean firing on half the galaxy's forgotten civilizations. It would mean a massacre broadcast live across every relay in the outer systems. He thought about his orders. He thought about his career. He thought about the way the Senate would react if he pulled the trigger and what the galaxy would look like afterward. He opened a channel to the Ilhari High Command, requesting revised orders. The situation has changed. The response took 2 hours. When it came, it was a single word. Withdraw. The fleet turned and left. No shots were fired. No one was harmed out on the surface of the moon. Pell woke up from a nap and took a deep, clear breath. Adiz was sitting beside him, tears running down her face, laughing at nothing and everything in orbit. Danny Aguilar watched the warships disappear into jump space. He let out a long breath and leaned back in his seat. Now they know, Suki said over the channel. Danny nodded to himself. Yes, now they knew. But the Senate was not finished. The Senate's response to Brevins Drift was swift and absolute. Within 48 hours of the Ilhari withdrawal, the 3 elder species passed a unanimous resolution. Earth was to be completely blockaded. Every jump gate connected to the Sol system was shut down. Communication relays were severed. Trade routes were closed. Surveillance satellites were repositioned to ensure nothing entered or left. The message was simple. If humanity wanted to play games, humanity could play them alone. Thal Avarek, the Draven senior delegate, addressed the Senate after the vote. This is not punishment, he said, his 4 eyes steady and cold. This is containment. Earth has proven it cannot be trusted to respect the boundaries set by this body. Until they demonstrate compliance, they will remain isolated. The chamber ceiling glowed a satisfied blue dot on Earth. The effect was immediate. The last human ships in the outer systems scrambled to return before the gates closed. Some made it. Most did not. Hundreds of open road volunteers were stranded across dozens of worlds, cut off from home with no way back. Adiz Nwosu was one of them. She stayed on Brevins Drift because there was nowhere else to go and because Pell still needed her. Danny Aguilar parked his freighter on a station above Theni space and waited. Gustavo Reese kept teaching on his relay station because he did not know how to do anything else. The Senate expected collapse. Earth was a young civilization with limited resources and no experience in true isolation. Cut them off from the galaxy, and they would fracture. Their governments would turn on each other. Their unity would dissolve. Within a year, they would come crawling back, ready to accept their place. 6 months passed. Earth went silent. No transmissions. No signals. Nothing. The Senate was pleased. The plan was working. A year passed. Still nothing. The pleasure faded. Silence was expected. This much silence was not. Paulev was pulled from his observation post and reassigned. His new orders were direct. Go to the Sol system. Find out what the humans were doing. Report back. He took a small cloaked shuttle through a gap in the blockade that his supervisor did not know existed. 3 days later, he entered Earth's solar system and activated his long-range scanners. What he found made his blood run cold. There were 14 jump gates in the Sol system. Not Senate-approved gates. Not stolen technology. Human-built gates, constructed from scratch using principles that Palev's instruments could barely analyze. They were ugly things, rough and industrial, bolted together from asteroid-mined metal and powered by reactors that hummed with a frequency he had never encountered. They looked like they had been built by people who did not care about elegance and only cared about function. Every single one of them was active. Paulev drifted closer, his cloak holding, and scanned deeper. Earth's orbital space was transformed. Shipyards hung in the void around the planet, assembling vessels at a rate that should not have been possible for a civilization this young. Mining operations spread across the asteroid belt. Fuel processing stations orbited Jupiter. Research platforms floated in the upper atmosphere of Venus. They had not collapsed. They had not fractured. They had built. He checked the open road frequencies and found them louder than ever. The network had not died when Earth went dark. It had grown. The stranded human volunteers had kept working. New species had joined. Over 60 civilizations were now part of the open road, trading and sharing and building outside Senate-controlled space. The humans on Earth had established hidden relay connections through their new gates, feeding resources and blueprints to the network without the Senate knowing. Paulev sat in his shuttle and tried to process what he was seeing. A grade F civilization, locked in a box and left to die, had instead built an entirely new infrastructure in 12 months. They had created their own gate network, expanded their industrial base by a factor Paulev could not calculate, and quietly supported a growing coalition of species that the Senate had forgotten. He filed his report. This time, it was not ignored. The Senate session that followed was the most chaotic in living memory. The Draven Collective demanded immediate military action. Thal Avarek stood before the chamber and called for a full-strike fleet to be sent to the Sol system. His voice was steady, but Paulev could see the fear behind his eyes. This was not anger. This was the panic of someone who had just realized the walls he had built were made of paper. The Sorth Federation hesitated. Their representatives argued that a military strike against a species that had committed no act of war could destabilize the Senate's legitimacy. The Ilhari Dominion fractured. Half their delegation supported the Draven call for force. The other half pointed to the economic numbers and argued that the Open Roads parallel trade network was already eroding Senate monopolies faster than any fleet could stop. For the first time in 9,000 years, the three elder species could not agree on a course of action. Paulev watched from the observer gallery and felt something he had never expected to feel in the Senate chamber: hope. Out in the scattered systems of the open road, Danny Aguilar received a transmission from Earth. New gates were online. Supply routes were open. Reinforcements were coming. He read the message twice. Then he looked out his cockpit window at the stars and smiled. The box was open, and humanity was not staying inside. The Draven Strike fleet launched on a cold morning by Senate time. 40 warships, the largest military deployment the galaxy had seen in over 2,000 years. Their hulls were black and seamless, powered by psychic reactors that drew energy directly from the linked minds of their crews. They moved in perfect formation, silent and terrible, crossing the void toward the Sol system with the singular purpose of ending the problem of humanity once and for all. Thal Avarek watched them go from the Senate observation deck. He had pushed for this. He had argued, persuaded, and threatened until the vote passed. The Sorith had abstained. The Ilhari had split. But the Draven had enough votes alone, and the fleet was his. He told himself it was necessary. A grade F species had defied the natural order of the galaxy. If Earth was allowed to succeed, every locked-out civilization would follow. The system that had kept peace for 9,000 years would crumble, that he told himself many things. None of them quieted the unease in his chest. The fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system 3 days later. The commander, a Draven officer named Sail Torith, brought his ships out of jump space and immediately ordered a full scan. What he saw stopped him cold. There were ships everywhere. Not human ships. Not just human ships. The space between Earth and its outer planets was filled with vessels from every corner of the galaxy's forgotten territories. Bravari transports with patched hulls and flickering lights. Finny science frigates covered in sensor arrays. Cargo haulers from Species Sail had never heard of, their designs so foreign that his computers could not even classify them. Over 80 species. Hundreds of ships. A wall of civilization that stretched across the dark. And in front of all of them, 11 cargo freighters in a line. Danny Aguilar sat in the cockpit of the Honest Work and looked at the Draven fleet on his screen. 40 warships against a collection of freighters, transports, and research vessels held together by hope and welding wire. The math was not good. It had never been good. That had never been the point that he opened the broadcast channel. Every relay the open road had ever built carried his voice across the galaxy in real time. Every station, every settlement, every forgotten moon where someone had once received help from a stranger who did not have to give it. This is Danny Aguilar, broadcasting from Earth's doorstep. Behind me is the planet that the Senate called irrelevant. In front of me is the fleet they sent to prove it. Between us stand 80 species that this galaxy forgot. We did not come here with weapons. We came here with a point. He paused. He thought about Adiz and her clinic. He thought about Gustavo and his classroom. He thought about Riva, standing alone on a platform while the most powerful beings in the galaxy laughed at her. We did not tear up your laws because we hated them. We tore them up because they were wrong. Every species out here deserves a seat, a voice, and a chance. That is not rebellion. That is civilization. The broadcast went everywhere. Senate chambers, military command centers, homes and schools and hospitals on 1,000 worlds. Billions of beings heard it in real time. Sail Torith stood on his bridge and listened. He looked at the field of ships before him. He calculated the cost of firing, not in ammunition or energy, in meaning, in what the galaxy would become if he gave the order that he opened a channel to the Senate. I need to speak with the full council. For 3 days, the galaxy held its breath. The fleet did not fire. The coalition did not move. The two sides sat in the void and waited while the Senate argued behind closed doors. Pavlev was there. He had earned no right to speak, but he stood in the observer gallery and watched history bend. The Draven pushed for the strike. The Sorith pushed for negotiation. The Ilhari delegation, already fractured, broke apart entirely. Junior delegates from a dozen species rose to speak for the first time in centuries. Their voices shaking, but cleared on the third day, the vote was called. The motion was simple. Dissolve the Galactic Accord of Restricted Advancement. Open the gates. Let every species rise. IT passed. Not by much. Not cleanly. But it passed. Thal Avarek sat in his seat and said nothing. His 4 eyes stared at the chamber floor. He had held power for over 1,000 years, and he had just watched it slip through his fingers. Not because of a war, because of a freighter captain and a doctor and a schoolteacher and a diplomat who had stood on his platform and told him he would remember that he remembered. The fleet withdrew. The blockade was lifted. The gates opened. Pavlev received his new assignment the following morning. First Senate ambassador to Earth. A real posting. A meaningful one. He took a shuttle down through the atmosphere and landed on a green field outside a city that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Riva Okafor was waiting for him. She was older now. Her hair had gone gray at the temples, but her eyes were the same, sharp and steady and patient. Pavlev stepped on the grass and extended his hand the way he had seen humans do. Riva took it and smiled. "Told you you would remember," she said. Pavlev looked at the sky above him. Blue and open and full of clouds that moved with no pattern he could predict. Somewhere up there, 80 species were heading home through gates that had been closed for centuries. Somewhere out there, Danny was flying his freighter along a trade route that no longer required permission. Somewhere on a small moon, a child named Pell was breathing clearly and drawing pictures on the walls of a clinic that would never be torn down. The galaxy did not change overnight. It never does. But it changed. Slowly, stubbornly, imperfectly, the way all real change happens. And it started with a quiet planet that refused to stay quiet.